Congratulations, YouTube. You did it. You wore me down and you sucked me back in. I have too many subscribers here just to walk away entirely, especially with no alternative that truly stacks up and so many copycat channels uploading my shows for me anyway. But we can't forget that THC's account here is on thin ice. And so the YouTube version of the show has to be prefaced with this little PSA, only to say that episodes that contain the kinds of themes that have been regularly banned on YouTube will not appear here. And even with that precaution, there's already enough in the archive to get us removed, so remember that the higher side chats could be banned or put in timeout again at any time. And I won't be able to tell you guys about it. So if you feel like it's been too long since you've heard from me here on this digital, dystopian, draconian, data mining monster of a police state seeking platform, your first step should be to check the highersidechats.com for the latest shows. All right. Enjoy.
Brace yourself, because you're about to dive into another free first-hour episode of the Higher Side Chats, and we just want to let you know that whether you're looking for a companion through your paranoid insomnia, entertaining yourself through one of life's mundane activities, or trying to ward off the internal screams of all those sad, smothered souls around the office, THC is here. And you should know that every episode of the Higher Side Chats has an entire second hour for Plus members. Sign up at thehighersidechats+.com and you'll get years of Plus show archives, lifetime forum access, a special invite to Greg Carlwood's monthly joint sessions, MP3s of THC music, bonus episodes, tour videos, and 10% off t-shirts, grinders, and whatever else ends up in the Higher Side store. It's $8 a month that you won't miss, so become a Plus member and treat yourself in these troubled times. Always action-packed and commercial-free, which means you'll unfortunately never hear my voice again.
In the 1930s, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation through a series of radio broadcasts known as the Fireside Chats. His aim was to reassure the common man that our society would recover from its troubled times. Well, we're far from 1930, and I deal with a different kind of fire. For a new era of worldly frustration, we offer a fresh conversation. I'm Greg Carlwood, and these are the Higher Side Chats. And boom goes the dynamite, dear people. From sunny San Diego, I'm Greg Carlwood, just trying to help us all navigate the rough waters of the vast conspiracy. And the sea is angry these days, my friends. And while it is important to maintain a state of calm and critical awareness amongst the coronavirus quarantine chaos, there's no denying that we can see clearly now how certain players of the Capstone Cabal can coordinate their various pieces of the pie to shut down society almost entirely. 2020 vision indeed. Is this really about a virus, or is this about the technocratic control you've been warned of? Because I don't know anyone who's ill. I haven't seen anybody collapsing in the streets, but almost everyone I talk to is concerned or already deeply affected by the economic situation of this whole operation. Isn't that interesting? But there are many threads on the coronavirus cardigan, and it's hard to keep them all straight. Is this an engineered bioweapon that got out of control? Just an engineered virus-free panic to further the aims of the technocracy? The results of a 5G EMF bath in Wuhan, a scapegoat for a planned economic collapse, or a convenient cover story for an incoming asteroid? Well, I think we all want a little more clarity, and THC has definitely flipped the switch on the digital bat signal and called in a couple of the dark nights I think we need right now for a little pandemic podcasting powwow. And that would be Gordon White of Rune Soup and Chris Knowles of the Secret Sun blog. I'm sure you know them and their work well by now, and with their powers combined, I hope the double dose of insight will serve us all well. It's a little silver lining in the insanity, and I'm psyched to get into it. Christmas comes early with the magic Michelin star chef of the ever-flavorful Rune Soup and the synchro mystic sage of the Secret Sun blog. Gordon and Chris, welcome back as always.
Great to be here. Wish it was under better circumstances.
Yeah. But, gathering the brain's trust is gathering the brain's trust, so I'm looking forward to it.
Cheers to that. And yes, I'm definitely calling in the big guns, guys. Though I wish we were, as you say, Chris, breaking bread under less severe circumstances. And It's still a goddamn treat to have you both here. I think people like the comfort of some familiar company and also the insights you can share about reading through the lines here and knowing how to make sense of it all. A little more casual than a normal THC, but let's get into it. Maybe you can both just give us your thoughts off the top when it comes to what we've seen in the past week and maybe how it's affected you. Gordon, you want to kick us off? You were traveling.
Yeah. I just got back from London a couple of days ago, so I've been through a whole bunch of seemingly apocalyptic places, and the last couple of nights in London looked that way because people were told not to go out, and then eventually they did have a shutdown. But I missed that. I will just say on that there's a kind of funny or odd loop where most of the discussion online is about how bad this is. But I'll tell you, and this is a good news piece, but as we move into exploring it, on the ground, no one believes it. Like I was talking to cafe owners and restaurant owners as I'm sitting there, the only one in the building. And in the actual lived day-to-day thing, most people are already suspicious that what we are being told isn't a very good map of what's going on. And I think that for me, how we approach a sense of coherent analysis at the moment is to break it into different kind of like bubbles. And the trouble at the moment is people are kind of moving from different domains of expertise or understanding and weaving together. And so there's challenges with the whole virology model and testing as one area that I think people need to upskill on. And then there's the actual evidence for that's almost a flow on from that for whatever this virus happens to be now. And then there is the kind of next step, which is, well, then how much of this is almost like a fog or aggregate of idiocy and media nonsense, and how much of it is a plot, right? And that's the bit, if you don't kind of separate them out and go, well, do you understand how virology and testing works? And have you actually done a decent data analysis about what it is that we are and aren't being told? Otherwise, you end up with this is a bioweapon, blah, 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 and it's worse than it is, or what have you. And it's if you kind of, for me, I think it's intellectually useful to break it into sort of three sectors so that you don't get caught in the cross currents of fear-based speculation. That would be my opening statement. Christopher.
Yeah. How's the East Coast, Chris?
Well, I'll tell you, I went to pick up my daughter in New York. She was living in New York, going to school. And it was like the Omega Man driving into New York City. I mean, we're driving in at rush hour. And I'll just say this, even at 3:00 in the morning, driving in and out of New York, I've seen more traffic. It was surreal, but everything has been surreal. And, for me personally, my experience of the world has been quite surreal, dating back much further back than this virus. So I am probably idiotically sanguine about this. I see this, whatever is going on is just as an inevitability. And, having spent time in the ocean as a kid, inevitability becomes a lesson that you learn, and you learn to sort of go with the flow and go with the current and, steer yourself in certain ways. But like just right now, I hate to say this because this sounds insensitive, but I almost feel like I just expected something like this. I've been expecting something like this for a long time. As a matter of fact, Gordon and I, had discussed this privately 2 years ago, and I did a post on the blog called "The Microbes Are Ready."
Yeah.
When I was just kind of gathering all these stories that were popping up in late 2017, dealing with antibiotic resistance, and then Bill Gates has been banging this pandemic drum for quite some time, and we had Disease X, which popped up. I don't know if you guys remember Disease X, but there was a whole big back and forth about that. And then, of course, the Event 201 confab last year in New York City at the Pierre Hotel. So I just really, I'm not very happy clearly about what's going on right now. I'm as nervous and apprehensive as a lot of people are. But at the same time, I just feel like this is, as Gordon would say, this is where we go in this part of the timeline.
Indeed. And Gordon, you said first we should break this up into bubbles, which is apt terminology for a quarantine, of course.
Yep.
And I agree. We want to be somewhat methodical. I guess to start it more the beginning, let me ask you about your thoughts on the coronavirus itself. Which way are you leaning on the questions of where did it get started? Is an emerging new virus really why this is all happening? Are you even concerned with getting sick? These sorts of things.
If you're asking if it's a bioweapon, it isn't. That's like bioweapons have a kill rate of 60%. Like this is not a bioweapon, right? That said, basically, it is an artifact of testing, which doesn't mean it's not real. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff about virology where anyone who has like a flu or a respiratory infection, between 5 and 15% of them are caused by coronaviruses. So you actually can accidentally invent this if you keep testing for people, right? And that's sort of the challenge. And particularly, and I know you read John Rappaport's stuff too, and he's been playing a blinder with this particular situation we're in. Wuhan is one of the most polluted cities on earth, and all of these people in their 80s who have been smoking for literally 70 years in one of the most polluted cities on earth come down with pneumonia in pneumonia season, and then they test them. And so between 5 and 15% of them are going to have coronaviruses in them, because that's one family of viruses that do things like this. So you can accidentally invent this, right? And that, I think that's kind of what I mean about when you talk about virology and virus theories, there's challenges with, well, what is a coronavirus? And then it's how do we measure them? And how do we declare whether there is one in there? And you can't, if you look at the way they're doing it, it's garbage, right? So they found some RNA molecules which can come from anywhere and are associated with inflammation anyway, and declare that it's a novel coronavirus. But we've been sharing this, Greg, like false positive rates among asymptomatic people are 80%.
Yeah.
Like this is not, this isn't a coherent way. If this was a bioweapon, it would kill more people and it would be easier to track. This is a big chunk of it is the model we have to understand viruses is it's wrong because it's materialism, but more importantly, it's unreliable. You're only ever going to get kind of like weird guesstimate attempts that continually have to be revised. So in that sense, it's an artifact of our testing, most importantly, as to whether or not it exists or not, as a separate thing from a severe flu. And everyone's saying, oh, stop equating it to the flu. I'm like, I'll do you one better. I think it's less damaging than the flu.
Yeah.
This idea that I can compare anything to anything. I can compare this to AIDS. I can compare it to Mickey Mouse. This idea you shouldn't compare it to flu. I'm like, really? Do you want let's play data, shall we? Let's go with this. And step one is to kind of take a deep fucking breath and go, okay, well, how do we know what we know? And as soon as you get to there, you realize it's garbage before you even throw in some of the stuff like the clearly faked things coming out of Italy. And from step one, we actually need to know, well, what the F is virology? And how are we understanding how many cases we have? And I'll give you another bit, the data thing that is killing me, right? 99% of people who've died in Italy have pre-existing conditions. But when you're looking, and this is happening at the moment, the total case count is now bigger outside China than inside China. That's crap. That is an accumulation of every single case for an outbreak that's been going for 4 months. It lasts for 5 weeks. So you can't actually just count every single one and go, oh, there's more cases outside of China than there is now. I'm like, but okay, divide it by 5 weeks then. That's an aggregate of numbers based over 4 months and out of a test that is unreliable. So this thing from the very beginning is a mess. And I'm not sure how much of that, I'm going to go with 30-70 is a deliberate mess versus a side effect of a dysfunctional worldview that's kind of like caused different governments and so on to panic. I think there is an op here quite clearly. And it's a technocratic play, in particular focused on Europe. But I don't think that requires the coordination across the entire planet. It's a very reasonable pushback on, oh, okay, if it's an op, are you telling me Iranian prison guards are coordinating with President Xi? And I'm like, no, I'm not actually. I'm saying that the way we have the way the world agrees that viruses exist means that you actually only need to kind of do a little bit of a kick. And the whole thing tumbles into this panic reaction. And so that's kind of where I wanted to say bubble first is virology and testing. And then I want to look at the actual data that's showing up out of this unreliable system. And then after that, we can do, as Chris would say, cui bono, like who and where is winning out of this, and who as a result, might we finger for the person who caused it versus who is using this as an opportunity to push their own kind of agendas. So those are the kind of bubbles. And if we don't sort of separate them out, we do end up with a lot of the low quality discussion that has been going on about China's lying about the numbers and Trump's lying about how bad it is. And this is a bioweapon and blah, 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 blah. And okay, everyone calm down and go, how are they lying about the numbers? Let's actually look at how we create these numbers and then move it from there. And I think that is where we need to. That is to me the most rational way to not just trying to get a head around what is in fact going on, but in a way that it can provide what Catherine Fitz would call actionable intelligence. Because people listening to this are doing two things. They want to know what the hell is going on, but they also want to know what the hell is going on from a personal threat assessment perspective. What should they be scared of and in what way? And I think the clean way to do that is virology and testing, data around this particular virus, and then cui bono. But those are my thoughts. What do you reckon, Chris?
Well, I want to offer a word of dissent here. I mean, not directly, but I believe that this coronavirus is a classification of virus, right? Everybody's sort of talking about this virus like it's like a particular virus that is unique from other viruses, and coronavirus is a classification that alludes to how it behaves and how it infects people because of its architecture and so on. So I believe that this virus did escape from a laboratory. I don't believe it was weapons testing, but I believe that it had grown out. I believe the testing that was being done on this virus has grown out of a story that absolutely no one's talking about, but a story that I had been tracking for a number of years now, in which the moratorium on biological weapons testing was lifted. I believe back in 2015, very quietly lifted, and that a number of different viruses were, started to be experimented with, started to be experimented on. And 5 of these were coronaviruses. So we had 5 coronaviruses and I think 5 bird flus, flus in that family, because bird flu is essentially considered the most serious and the most deadly form of flu. So I believe that what has been going on is that there's been a lot of testing either for weaponization or for defense against weaponization, and that this particular virus, the COVID-19, the fact that they're denying it so strongly, that we're seeing so many blaring headlines saying this did not come from, that Wuhan Virology Institute that's 20 miles down the street from where this, has said to have broken out in this fish market. So I believe that what we are seeing is one of the reasons why biological testing was banned in the first place, because it's extraordinarily dangerous and it can backfire on you. That being said, I mean, I'm not exactly sure that this particular COVID virus is the problem that it is. I still have a very strong feeling, and I've discussed this with Gordon and he disagrees with me, but I get the feeling that something else is coming down the pike that is much more grave danger to us all, and that is why we're seeing this really extraordinary lockdown. I mean, because it's true. I mean, again, you've been prohibited from saying certain things, comparing this virus to flu virus and so on, but we have had much more dangerous flu viruses in the past several years. And we've had, I believe it's 5 years now in a row where flu viruses were they were useless. And, they said that these viruses are useless, but they said you should get them anyway, which doesn't make any sense to me at all. But, what do I know? So I believe that this virus is an artifact of this, the moratorium being lifted on weaponization of coronaviruses and bird flu viruses. I believe that that's the work that was being done at this Wuhan Institute, again, 20 miles due south of the fish market where this is said to have broken out. They're probably maybe doing, treatment options for it. I mean, it could be entirely benign. It could be entirely defensive. but I do think the coincidence there is just too stark to ignore.
It wasn't 20 miles though. It was much closer, wasn't it? It was like 900 feet or something.
I guess. I mean, I according to the map that I'm looking at, it was about 20 miles down the street. But we've heard stories that there were incidents at this particular location. One of which was that monkeys that had been tested on had freaked out and somehow escaped from the cages and started biting people and all this kind of insanity. And that there was a concern that maybe it wasn't even a live virus that had been infecting somebody who worked there, who began to distribute it among the populace. But I realize that Wuhan is very polluted, but I mean, you can say that about any number of Chinese cities. We've seen over the past 10 years, pictures where it's dark at noon and everybody's wearing goggles and masks because the pollution is so bad. And that's any number of cities in China.
But they're not, the other cities aren't being tested for it. So you just have people in those cities die of pneumonia. Like if you actually look at the number of people who die of pneumonia in pneumonia cities in big cities in China, like the number of people who apparently had coronavirus and died from it just is lost in that noise. So you actually can just literally invent it by looking for it.
No, I understand that, but the coincidence is just too stark for me. And the fact that, a lot of people, influential people, have been risking really pissing China off by coming out and saying that this is because of the irresponsible handling at this virology center. And, high-placed people in the Indian government said this as soon as the outbreak began. We've had a lot of prominent Republicans like Tom Cotton talking about this and saying that this is China's Chernobyl, making that this is irresponsible handling of biological materials leading to what we're seeing. So I think we're seeing an overabundance of caution in some regards, but you always have, what's that Rahm Emanuel's maxim, never let a crisis go to waste. So there could be any number of things happening. But
I did want to say, like, if you start with virology and testing, I guess we're jumping to cui bono, right? Because the fact I wanted to start with, this is the challenge with locating with saying a virus even exists in the first place. It doesn't mean just because I don't think it came from the lab, I don't think it was fake. I think you can actually say, whether it exists or not, this is a kind of Bill Gates level technocratic plot, right? So and that's what I see in a whole bunch of things like China's response, and in countries that don't seem to give a fuck who should, like Japan. Japan doesn't have an outbreak, and it was supposed to be the next Wuhan because they're not testing people, right? So they've ended up with like 900 cases. They should have apparently had thousands because they had one of those apparent plague ships dock, right? So it's not just India. It's also Russia doesn't seem to give a goddamn shit about it either. And all these countries that you think would shows that the reaction is planned because there is an unevenness. If it was something big coming down the pike, Japan would be reacting in a way that would look like Europe and the US, because especially if it was extraterrestrial, for instance, the Japanese Space Agency shares that kind of information on a space agency to space agency basis. And we're not seeing that. We're seeing the countries that are under the technocratic thumb reacting in a way that leads towards technocracy. The China, like going after China for this is literally one of the points. Like I've been saying this for since 2016, and since the arrival of Trump, part of the game is the onboarding of manufacturing steps back inside the US. So of course you're going to get Republicans saying China mishandled this, China's unreliable. The whole point of the sanctions and the rest of it is to bring those manufacturing steps back into North America. And this will certainly accelerate that. So that's either, I think that's a subset of the technocratic goal, but it is absolutely part of it. So you're right that everyone's going after China for it for reasons that look like racism, and in the case of Trump, are racism. But there's a very specific purpose behind it that doesn't need to be, I'm not sure what's going on here. So no, it's quite explicit what's going on here. It's a continuation, and more importantly, a dialing up of the macro project we have seen since 2016. And that's the scary bit for me, right? If we're at cui bono, and this is something Catherine Fitz said last week in Money and Markets, right? Which is, whatever is going on, picture it like this. Mr. Global has said you aren't achieving these milestones fast enough, So let's get this done. So there is a point in time, I agree with you on this, Chris. I think that's what you're feeling. There is a point in time that the technocratic layer is trying to get a whole bunch of projects done by, right? And that's going to end up being things like a digital currency and 24/7 surveillance of people, whether it's via ID 2020 chips or your phone or the rest of it. There is the remaining kind of like 4 important pieces of a full technocratic takeover, for whatever reason, have been like prioritized. It's like when your boss will yell at you, like, get this done. I don't care. You need to have this done by now. And whatever now is, I guess we'll find out.
Well said. And, I do think there's some international games being played with the blame game, but the story, it is interesting that they're attacking like this wet market. They're attacking a place where people go for food.
Well, they knocked it down.
Oh, well, there you go.
They knocked it down. Did you see that?
I didn't.
A week and a half ago, you think, well, that's fucking dodgy. Like, if this is ground zero of a dangerous virus, you would keep it open and you would descend on it with your little swabs and whatever and see what else you can find. But China knocked it down.
Right. Well, that goes to my point. And also, it's just like the story that this is like a bat soup situation. That sounds more like something that plays on Westerners' assumptions and prejudices about the East, rather than something that actually happens.
Yeah, I think that story is absolute nonsense. The pangolin that I don't believe it at all. I mean, again, I do believe that it came out. I do diverge from Gordon on this. I find the coincidence there just too stark to ignore. But, I wanted to just sort of place this in context, and these are things that Gordon would be aware of. But for the past several years, there's been a growing chilliness between the Chinese Communist Party and Western corporate interests, and that the welcome mat that had been put out for Western corporate interests since Nixon is being drawn back. And one of the things that I got this information from are people who have YouTube channels who have been living in China and have since moved to places like Thailand or Vietnam, places still in Asia where they can do business and continue doing the work that they were doing. But I was hearing a lot of admittedly anecdotal information about the chilliness growing between Westerners doing business in China and the Chinese. And this is something that predates this latest situation. So I think that there is, as Gordon says, I do definitely think that we are going to see a massive pullback of corporate and technological manufacturing being done back in the United States. And, this is something Gordon and I discussed a number of years ago when he talked about 3D printing and all these kind of technologies that are allowing you to get around that market and that huge disparity in wages between China and the West. So we are seeing a lot of technologies that are working to counteract that. But as far as, I'm not exactly sure that this is a Mr. Global plan, because the linchpin of Mr. Global's plan is China. I mean, China is the
No, it's not. Not anymore. I guarantee it's not. Not anymore. And especially at the moment, if you're looking at a Europe that's about to fail, and that's where they're at from a debt perspective, Europe can't fail. And by that, I mean Brussels. So let's do it this way, Chris. If next week, we're recording this on a Sunday morning, my time, if on Monday there's a 3-week bank holiday in Europe, it's Mr. Global. Because we're looking at Europe suspending it's having a 3-week bank holiday, currency cancellation, and the rise of Eurobonds, because that's what the China thing and the rest of it is about. This is where we will see the digital currency start, because Europe is ruined without it. And I think that's one of the things that's pulled it forward. I guarantee China hasn't been the linchpin of Mr. Global's plans for a while. It has, but the guy, the continuation of Europe is a bigger part of that. And let me tell you, I think it's a hit against a coherent China, because if you look at the other places that are allegedly having a bad time with this virus, you have Iran and Italy, and those are the kind of turning points on the Silk Road. So Iran is where you kind of like turn right to get into Europe, and Italy is where you turn left. So you've actually got like a smackdown, not just on China, but on this, which by the way is a scam. Like Silk Road is a boondoggle promise for Eurasian countries to fall under China's thumb. Like the idea that you can use a train to bring things into Europe. Again, people just need to look at the data on this. Like one super tanker can take the equivalent cargo of 100 trains. So you'd actually need 100 train tracks next to each other going through Mongolia to replace one super tanker. So it's not actually what the hit is about is the kind of Chinese economic dominance of a cohering Eurasia. So I think it's highly suspect that the worst places apparently that are having challenges with this virus are kind of like the right turn and the left turn on the Silk Road. That seems like it's, if we're talking about it can't be a coincidence, well, that one can't be a coincidence.
That's interesting. It's like a Western clapback on the idea of the Silk Road Initiative. It's like, no, you don't.
Yeah, basically.
Well,
because now you've just added a whole bunch of fear and risk on that. Yeah, go for it.
I just want to say that one of the reasons, as far as Italy is concerned, and I know that there's a lot of controversy about what is in fact actually going down there, and that one of the numbers I read that 80% of the people who had died apparently from coronavirus had serious medical issues.
It's 99%.
Yes,
99%. It's not 80%.
And there's also the issue of, because of Merkel and Macron basically screwing over Southern Europe, that Europe is, Italy in particular skews much older than other countries because so many young people have left to find employment. But the other thing that I would offer as far as Italy is concerned is that Italy is also, a big player in the textile, clothing, and fashion market. And that, China basically took that over in, I would say, the late 90s. And this is something that I can speak to from experience because, I used to do a lot of work, T-shirt work and so on for clothing manufacturers in New York. And most of them are gone. And most of the others have either been bought out by Chinese interests or Syrians. So I think that might have a lot to do, from what I've read, that particularly in Florence is a large Chinese population because of this industry. But, I just want to say, Gordon is much more, as you can tell by this conversation, Gordon is a lot smarter than I am, and he's a lot better read. I go by instinct and so on, and probably, to my detriment. But I just feel I can't pin the tail on this, is all I'm saying, is that I am not confident or comfortable making any kind of definitive statement about what is really going on here, because I'm looking at in the background again of this chilling between Chinese interests and American corporate interests, but let's also look at the fact that the media in America is increasingly owned by Chinese interests, Chinese sovereign capital companies and so on, companies related to the Chinese army, the People's Revolutionary Army, but the media, the colleges, so many things that we talked about, Greg, as far as these industries that are being sort of hammered by the woke virus. The Chinese bought into these industries in a very, very big way in the 90s and early 2000s. So, they're getting hammered there as well. But then we've also seen this incredibly strange and troubling, and I'm sure this fits more into Gordon's description of this, but you've seen all these CEOs of the hugest companies in the world stepping down, and in some cases looking like they're stepping down under duress. And I know, so your Q and non people all say that this is the storm, and they're all part of this international Pizzagate conspiracy and all things like that. I think that there's in fact something going on, but this just really speaks to things that Gordon and I have been talking about before Trump was elected, and that's this whole idea of the war in heaven, that there are huge international monetary, financial, corporate, military interests that are vying for dominance and doing so out of our reach, out of our sight, and we only sort of see, we see the breadcrumbs falling from the table, but we don't see what's being served. So I think that I cannot make a definitive answer or definitive thesis as to what we are in fact seeing, because there are so many things going on and so much data that I, at least I have no access to.
Fair. And let me just back this up a little bit to that underlying topic of virology and testing, because I'm really combining the work of John Rappaport and David Crow. And John is saying, like, look, all these people do have other conditions, as Gordon threw out, 99%. And it seems like these people have particular conditions that don't jive well with the treatments they're getting, with these malaria and Ebola drugs.
Exactly. Oh, my God.
And so these are the reasons why people are dying. And just to throw out David Crow's thing, he studied SARS a lot, which was the last coronavirus. And his attitude is they can control the amount of cases they get with the testing, because it is kind of an artifact of testing, like you said. So if they want less cases, they'll either test less people or change the parameters of the test, and then they get to claim themselves as the hero. And I thought it was really interesting because my paranoia is getting tested, testing positive, and then getting thrown into the ringer because I won't have control over my decision to opt out of the dangerous treatments. But I thought it was really interesting when Trump and Pence were on TV today giving this press conference, and they were both very adamant that if you don't have symptoms, do not seek out a test. And I was very happy to hear that, because it sounds like there might be some games and some pushback there. But Gordon, talk to us about virology and testing.
Oh, thank you, Gregory. Yeah. So I agree with Chris that we don't know what's going on. My point is to find the actionable intelligence. And the main one that, and I think this is true, the main one that we want to get across is be not afraid, in particular of the virus, for a bunch of reasons. And I mean it's like it may not exist, like it may be an artifact of this testing. But I'll talk you through a whole bunch of that. And then we'll end up with what I will tell you to do if you do get forced. If what happens is that you end up, in particular in the US, where everyone has to take the test, and that will be another indication that it's like the Bill Gates level technocrat plot, right? But before we get to that, let's talk about how you. It appears that this novel coronavirus responds to malaria treatments and azithromycin. Now, that is basically proof that the thing you were looking at is a cluster of symptoms associated with like a nest of things that go on. Like azithromycin is an antibiotic. It does nothing to viruses, but it will take care of anything opportunistic that comes along while you are sick. Same thing with something like malaria. Malaria can prevent essentially the movement of viruses into cells. Same thing with HIV treatments, right? Which, like, I think I told you, Chris, that I bought a bunch of prep before I went to Europe in case I got trapped there, which I wouldn't take ordinarily because these are the way they work by stopping reverse transcription. That process is required for about 50% of the cells in your body, so you shouldn't be taking it at the best of times. But the fact that it's not just that the testing is unreliable and that 99% of people have pre-existing conditions. The proof that there's kind of nothing there is that a broad spectrum approach apparently cures it. And that wouldn't be the case if the symptoms are associated with a so-called novel coronavirus. It's impossible. And we would have the evidence of that if people had actually acculturated the RNA molecules associated with this virus from someone who was sick and then put it in another animal and observe the appearance of those symptoms. But no one in this process has done it, right? So this is kind of what I mean, like, be not afraid of the virus. And for a bunch of reasons, when I say it might not exist, you will still get sick because, in the Northern Hemisphere, you're coming to the edge of flu season. But it shifts from a place of terror with all these fake pictures of people in like masks spraying things down and whatever, to a place of lean forward optimism. It's like, right, well, I'm going to take my immune system seriously. I'm going to stop eating this garbage. And right now, if you're stuck at home as I am, get a regular amount of sleep and get it at night. Do some sort of regular exercise, stop eating garbage, manage things like inflammation. And when it comes to testing, Greg, this is the tip, right? the tests that they will send you are not just unreliable, but they're essentially looking for inflammation markers. So like the RNA molecules that they have decided is associated with this virus will show up in states of inflammation. So if you're a bit sick, you are more likely to test for it, right? But you can do things like a 3-day fast will completely reset your immune system, right? So if you're going to get this test, and I don't mean like if you're sick and you're going to get the test because you've kind of bought into this thing or whatever. And you know what? Manage your own health how you want to manage it. But I'm saying for people who are like you and me concerned about a test, which will mean in the case of the US, 330 million DNA samples associated with either an ID 2020 tag or a telephone number, an app that will allow you. The thing is, they're going to force total 24/7 surveillance of you, because the story is going to be you might be an asymptomatic carrier. Right. And so we need to know where you are at every single moment of your day and work out who it is you're hanging out with, right, so that we can trace back this imaginary virus. This is the technocratic plot. It's really, really bad. And one of the things we can do is, when we're stuck inside, is obviously manage your health. That is your job now. Your job is to have the best immune system possible. And there are hacks for that when it comes to the virus, which is things like, if you don't have underlying conditions, a 3-day water fast will reset your immune system. People have won Nobel Prizes in medicine for it. Like there are things we can do, but the game is this. The game is a combination of 24/7 monitoring with approval of movements, which is already happening in China and Europe, and matching that to your DNA. Like, this is the dream. This is what I mean. Like, it's the next goddamn step in a global technocracy. And Chris mentioned the woke virus, right? This is a perfect example. So it's a Catherine Fitzism, but like, here's the thing. She observed last year, and it's true, because we were talking about how the woke virus destroys everything it touches, and it doesn't work anymore. But none of Mr. Global's narratives are working anymore, and they are in fact making it worse. Climate change, making it worse. Refugee crisis, making it worse. Identitarianism, making it worse. So again, picture the scenario where it's like, my plans for moving the planet into this technocratic managerial structure are not working.
Right.
What do? And this is what we do.
Yes. And it's also important to point out that a plan is not set in stone. You know, we can react to it, and this might all fall apart, but it's important to talk about what they want to do. And I agree with you on the surveillance aspect. You can get a situation where they've got your cell phone, so anytime they see 10 cell phones interacting together in one place, they just send the cops out and break it up. You know, you're not supposed to be here, social distancing. And I worry about the test, but more so the fact that they're going to send this out after everyone's been inside for 30 days under artificial light, afraid to go outside, no relief from their own EMF exposure or Wi-Fi exposure in their house. And after, say, 30 days, all your good produce is going to be gone. You're going to be eating those chips. You're going to be eating that corporate food. So when the time for the test does come, there'll be a lot of broken immune systems out there. And I hope a strong immune system is enough to beat the test. I really don't know enough about that. I'm worried that it's just an RNA marker. So, like, I don't know if it's directly related to the immune system.
It's a bit of a crapshoot.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a crapshoot, but the thing you can do best to minimize getting a positive result is to make sure that you are in the least possible inflamed state, because you essentially have more RNA junk floating around when you're in a state of inflammation. So that's the only thing you can do. But the other thing, like, I get why the president doesn't want everyone to be tested, because leaving aside the fact that people who apparently have who test positive for a coronavirus, which they would, because between 5 and 15% of people who present symptoms have a coronavirus. But more importantly, even a 95% accurate test, which is what they're saying it is, trash, doesn't matter, do the numbers on this. So a small amount of the population actually has the coronavirus. But if you test 330 million people, 5% of 330 million people means that you have more false positives than you do people that have the coronavirus.
Yes.
And that, like, so if you test everyone, you literally do the numbers and go, well, more people will have it than don't. This is like, anyway, the point I wanted to talk about all this is just for people to take a deep breath and be not afraid of the virus, and be very, and consequently, that changes how we look at what may be the plan, which is a fun thing to do. But again, I'm more interested in, okay, well, based on trajectories, because this gets really bad from an economic perspective, and that may not have even been the goal, because as you say, Greg, this plan, like all plans, won't succeed. There's something built into the universe that's very Tower of Babel, where all through history we try to do it and it doesn't work. So we're just on one of those upswings towards like technocratic totalitarian. It never works. However, the upswing and the collapse we have to live through. So that's kind of what I mean. Don't be afraid of the virus. And spend some time trying to understand what you think is going on, but mostly from the perspective of deriving personal tactics out of it. I say, okay, cool. So I don't need to be as scared of the virus unless I'm in my 80s and I've been smoking for 70 years and I live somewhere very polluted and all that kind of stuff. And you know what? Cool. We're all to some extent immunocompromised, but if you're not, or even if you can manage that. You know your own goddamn immune system, right? But then look at the medium term of going, okay, so we're looking at 20% unemployment. We're looking at nationalization of airlines and other businesses. We're looking at a complete swamping out of small and medium businesses so that all of this money, which is coming via a Republican UBI, will just get pumped back into Amazon and everywhere else. You think this is like, that's what's going to happen one way or the other. Whatever you think the virus is, and whatever you think the goal of this operation is, that's going to happen one way or the other. We're going to end up with 20% unemployment. We're going to end up with effectively a Great Depression. So that's the bit where you kind of need to go, okay, this is the thing to not necessarily be scared of, but like put your awareness and your focus on how you manage that. What are your exposures? We just, in the members area, we just finished a wealth magic course, which did a whole bunch of strategy at the very beginning around this notion of first survive, right? And that essentially means find your helms deep. Like in the case of where it is you are going to, and I don't mean like a bug out bag in the woods. I mean, where can you live, whether it's with friends or family, or even you might be that person, where you can effectively live forever on zero money, right? So what's your version of that? Because people are going to be looking at, well, my rent is this much and I only have this much money in the bank and so on, and have those discussions with people, because you might think it's weird. Let me tell you, everyone's thinking it, right? So talk to your friends or family or whoever, the combination of people that is. There is a tremendous amount of like relief that comes from knowing that, even if you don't have to roll it out. And that's kind of what, if you break it into bubbles and go, well, what's virology? Let's look at the threat assessment from the virus. And then the next two is cui bono, but also what do we do? And I'm very big on making sure that we can speculate, and I think it's a technocratic plot, but I don't let my strategy about what it is I do hinge on being right about who I think is kind of behind it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Chris, what are you thinking?
Well, I think that what Gordon says about your immune system is excellent advice, and I think it's advice that people should be following anyway. But this would be a boring show if I just agreed with everything Gordon said. But
right,
like Catherine Austin Fitts, like I think she knows the markets real well. But I think her she's got a real boomer mentality, and her boomer mentality is like when globalism was sort of coming up the pike in the early Reagan administration, and it was sort of everyone's focus. I think Mr. Global is either dead or on his sickbed, to be honest with you. I think what we're seeing here is not like, oh, let's get this new world order, get everyone online, worldwide and stuff. I think this is the exact opposite. I think this is using this opportunity. Let's put the best spin on this. Just using this opportunity to dismantle globalism. I think globalism is being destroyed. I think that globalism was something that was tried, and it was tried because there was a problem in the late 70s, early 80s, and it had to do with GDP growth, and it had to do with productivity, and it had to do with you're sort of on the cusp of dealing with an aging population, particularly in America, but also in the West in general. And, this is something that has really accelerated in Europe. We sort of headed it off at the pass a bit because we had, a mini baby boom in the 80s when a lot of boomers started having children in the late 80s and stuff. But I think that globalism has always existed, right? It's always been sort of this pipe dream dating back to Alexander the Great. But I think a lot of people who might not have signed on to it because of these crises that we were seeing beginning in the 70s with what they call stagflation and maturing of markets, maturing of industries, that it just seemed like having that sort of closed shop idea was not the way forward to increase GDP and to create a more dynamic economy and dynamic corporate environment. I think what we've seen is that we're sort of like it's kind of like one of these science fiction movies where something's grown from an embryo to death in a week or something, because the course of globalism reminds me a lot of a Marxist critique of the course of capitalism. So just as a lot of Marxists believe that we're in late capitalism now, I think, like we said, I think we're in late globalism. I think globalism is either dead or on its deathbed, and you might notice,
totally.
And you might notice
Totally.
that we never see George Soros make any personal appearances anymore. I think he's sick. I think he's extremely sick. And a lot of it was his money, and I think him funneling Chinese money into the West, into all these nonprofits and so on. And I got to tell you, I was just laughing because I saw like this emergency alert on Twitter, like Bloomberg Business Week or something was saying, what we've really got to worry about is these nonprofits in New York that are, going out of business. And it's funny too, because when you think about like Mr. Global, I mean, who would you choose more as Mr. Global as Mike Bloomberg? And then we see him in the debates, and he's just a fucking idiot. I mean, he just got his shit just completely sliced to ribbons. I mean, there's Mr. Global right there. I mean, he's the guy.
But we're actually saying the same thing, Chris. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's the narratives aren't working. I agree. I'm not saying it's going to work. I'm saying this is the game. Like, and I think you can see that in the military Trump react, like this idea he was sort of slow to get on board or what have you. You look at it and go, this isn't the scenario plan that we had for how we manage China. And I think that's what I mean. Like, Technocratic, Mr. Global, the difference, the layer is sort of like US technocrats and Brussels technocrats are the same. They believe in things like the EU and so on. That's what I think this plot is. I don't think it's any kind of worldwide conspiracy. I think you can actually get the world panicked into this. And you'll notice it's kind of not yet working. So even though Gates he stepped down, but he also stepped down from very unusual finance places. Like he was on Buffett's board, for instance, and he stepped away from that.
Berkshire Hathaway.
Yeah. So he was on the board and stepped back from it.
I see, but that gets my hackles up, because it's like I can see him stepping down from Microsoft because it's like he's been with that company for 50 years. But his seat on the board of Berkshire Hathaway, I mean, that's his seat on the fucking Mount Olympus. You know what I'm saying? That's something that people die with that on their resume. You don't walk away from that. And I can't help but wonder.
Unless you have another operation to crash things like that.
This is what I think it is. I think it is. Well, it's not that. It's that. No. It's not that. It's not that. Okay. This is the Mr. Global technocratic scenario that I think it is, and I don't think it works. That's my point. But it's because they've been told like the plan wasn't working, so let's give this one a shot. He's still shilling even now the ID 2020 thing, right? So let's say you see the idea of the global pandemic, and countries will react the way they do for a bunch of reasons. That's how they react, especially countries post 9/11 that have all this whole industry of disaster response professionals that government money goes to, so that different organizations and government departments know what their disaster response thing is for earthquakes and terrorist attacks and bioweapons and so on. So everyone's kind of like, this is Marge's time to shine. They're like, yes, let's roll this out. And you can kind of get that to work, but you'll notice it's not foregone. So he's out there shilling, we need to do this now and we need to do this now. So like the game is afoot rather than foregone. And that's kind of what I mean. I don't think it works. I think cosmically technocracy doesn't work because that's not how the universe works, but that's like a metaphysical discussion rather than a tactical one. I think this is the game, but it definitely doesn't work. Like what happens is, as Europe probably next week does its 3-week bank holiday and does a currency cancellation on the way to like a digital version of it that's backed by Eurobonds, that panics the markets even more, and that actually ends the EU over the next couple of years, right? So this is the kind of thing Armstrong's predicting about all that money coming back into the US. I don't think it works. I think this is the plot. That's kind of different, right?
Well, no, I just want to take this down to sort of a basic psychology issue. So if we're seeing this virus and the scare, and then the disruptions in the economy, disruptions in the market, disruptions in, say sports leagues, just canceling their seasons and losing hundreds of billions of dollars, which I can't imagine for the life of me that they would do, just to go along with this program. I mean, on a basic psychology issue, psychological issue, if you're trying to sell this idea of globalism and international open borders, they've really been pushing this open borders idea really hard for the past 3 or 4 years. What could be more destructive, more annihilating to this idea of free travel and open borders and, the international brotherhood of man is thinking that, like, people are bringing a deadly virus into your country. There's absolutely, that is primal. There's no, that is the absolute, this is why we had witch hunts, you know what I mean? This is why we've had pogroms and massacres, because, they're plague carriers. You understand what I'm saying? This is basic,
totally
primal animal survival psychology. So I cannot see for the life of me that whatever is going on here was like Mr. Global saying, all right, this is our last ditch effort. I just don't think that makes any sense.
I'll tell you why. It does.
I'll
tell you why, because no, it's not. It's you're thinking like an American, okay? Think like a European. This is saving the EU. The EU doesn't, in its own opinion, Brussels doesn't have sovereignty over its borders. So what do we have at the moment? You remember last week, 50,000 US troops showed up in Europe, and it was all, they don't have masks. Like, oh yes, that was an oopsie daisy. The US military forgot to bring masks. No, the EU, Macron wants it, Brussels wants it. They want a goddamn army, and they want Brussels sovereignty over the borders. These and the Eurobonds and the currency is the op. The EU must survive. You're thinking about it like it's American. If it is a level of globalist that is prioritizing Europe, this is exactly what it would look like.
Yeah, but what you're talking about is the institution of Fortress Europe. Shutting down the whole Schengen agreement. They're finally blocking all these migrant boats coming in from North Africa. Shutting down the flow coming in from Turkey. What you're talking about is not globalist. It's not Mr. Global. It might be, the people who sort of, these European aristocratic houses and European banks and stuff that were that saw globalism as their way out of their post-war impasse. But this is the tide going out on globalism. This is the return to Fortress Europe. This is the return to Fortress America. This is the death knell. This is the death blow to Mr. Global. This is killed. There's no way that I cannot wrap my head around the fact. No matter how important Europe is, what they're creating in people's minds is the opposite of open borders, the opposite of globalism, internationalism, all these kind of things. It's the exact opposite. It's back to lift up the drawbridge,
No, so we're actually in broad agreement. It's just that you kind of deprecated a definition of Mr. Global to be a sort of 20th century idea of what these tactics would look like. And I think that's sleeping on how deeply this is a technocratic plot, because it's like Europe, as the EU and the Brussels model must survive. Like that's the kind of thought that goes through them. It doesn't work, but we're actually talking about the same thing. And it's just like, what's the version? How do you track open borders? Let's say Soros's wet dream came through and the entire world is open borders. Well, how do you monitor where people are? Like, it's not just you can wander in willy-nilly wherever you want. It's the opposite of that. It's that you put a border around the planet, right? And that's actually what ID 2020 is. So this is not necessarily contraindicated like, Fortress America, Fortress Europe. Absolutely. And this is a thing, this has been like the kind of like national security policy for the US for the last 8 years, to be honest. It's not even a Trump thing. It's the kind of drawing up of the drawbridges. But Europe's in a really bad way. Like, is it not Europe itself, the countries and the landscape, but the EU as a project's in a really, really bad way, and it would have ended this year had it not. If this is what I think it is, it would have ended this year anyway. It still does end, but this is like a Hail Mary to get that to work.
And I love all this, for real. And let's maybe zoom in a little bit, because we call this as a bit of an emergency meeting because people have a lot of immediate concerns and they're worried about how this is going to affect them and the people they know personally. And obviously, it is a big agenda. If we want to know who kicked the can, that started this whole snowball effect, we got to look at the top. But to back it up to the bubbles and the idea of what data is showing up, I mean, outside of even medical data, if we look at what seems to be the potential economic impact, what do you think is important for people listening to know?
It much like the health question, that's on an individual basis. You need to do a risk assessment. Like, what is it? If you work for, if you're a seat cleaner at an NBA stadium, it's just to Chris's point about, closing all the events for the rest of the year. They will probably reopen in the summer, but they will reopen in the summer because we will have had a 25% reduction in GDP. Like, it falls off a cliff. So you need to look at where you are. Where does your money come from? And in the short term, if you're a government employee, you should be all right. If you're at a middling college, dust off the resume because college applications are about to sink into nothing. In particular, the kind of like mid-rank, expensive, they're like, no one's showing up for them, right? But if you're at Harvard, you'll be fine. You will always be fine. So it's kind of like if you've just opened a cafe, start praying, like work out where it is that you are economically. And that's what I mean by find your helms deep. Like, what does your life look like if you have no money coming in? Like, where is that? And talk to your friends about it. If you think, well, actually, my friend's down the road, we could probably all live together. That's a 3-bedroom house. And so with some sort of government assistance, we'd be able to pay that rent and we'd have shared childcare and so on. Talk to them because they're thinking the same thing, okay? And it doesn't mean do it. It means work out what your helm's deep is because it will. We're facing not a recession, but like a depression level drop in economic activity. So everyone needs to kind of be where they are. That's the thing that I want people. Don't be afraid of the virus, within reason. And I mean, basically, don't. It's it is equivalent to other illnesses that you would get over a flu season. And so if that is something that puts you at personal risk, then you do need to be concerned about it. But if not, it doesn't. And focus instead on the things that you actually will need to take tactical action around. And that's kind of why this is why we do the bubble thing. We can look at the actual virus and we can speculate as to why the clear op components of this narrative are going on. And then the third thing is whatever happens, we kind of have a medium-term economic view that is quite stark, and you don't need to solve who's in charge of it to take the steps that you should be taking, even just for your own anxiety. And let me tell you, it sounds weird, but just talk to your friends or family about what is the worst case scenario and how do we do it, because they will be relieved to hear from you. Let me tell you that.
I did want to come back to what you had said about the coronavirus thing being a drill. It's like we have Event 201 last year, which is the tabletop simulation, then coronavirus, the live drill, and then potentially something that syncs up more with Martin Armstrong's model, an actual virus that people will think is the system crying wolf again, potentially. And so, there is not one template to follow. You always got to be critical. You always got to be paying attention. What happens one time is not necessarily what happens next time. So pay attention. And in summary, I would say drill down on that information about this being an artifact of testing, that it's an RNA artifact, not necessarily a virus. You don't necessarily need to be afraid of it. But when you get past that panic, then you maybe need to not be scared of a virus, but be prepared for the upcoming fallout. And man, I definitely feel a little bit better and a little bit worse, but that is the nature of the game here. And any parting words for the people from both of you?
Yeah, let me just cut in. I would just say, like what I said before, get your spiritual house in order. It's not going to save your life or your finances, but you will be you will to learn to accept both the good and the bad. I think is one of the great goals of all spiritual systems, and I think that it's something that I think we all need to become aware of, and I think turning yourself on to these powers that surround us that we're told don't exist, and we're told don't exist for reasons, right? To make us more efficient serfs, but to open your mind and your inner eye and your third eye, or however you want to put it, to the fact that this is not a dead mechanistic world, but a world that is teeming with all manner of energy and consciousness everywhere you turn. I think will strengthen your immune system, and it will reduce your levels of panic, and will allow you to make more rational and calm decisions, because you'll be able to put things in a greater context that most people are discouraged from putting it in. And I hope I don't sound too Pollyanna about it, but believe me, this is very hard fought and hard won wisdom on my part.
Fair.
Sure.
Gordon, what are you thinking in terms of parting words here?
The old world is not coming back. This is the end of it, which means you have no choice but to create the world that you actually want moving forward, or you will get one. And that is, there is an optimism that actually kind of flows on from what Chris was just saying there, which is there is no return to normalcy. This is a big deal, and the correct and glass half full way of looking at that is that you have nothing preventing you from actually living the life that you should be living.
Well, cheers to that, fellas. This has been a long time coming, getting these three aspects of the Godhead on one podcast, the Holy Trinity. If I could be so presumptuous to insert myself in there. But man, I'm glad we could make it happen. Of course, people can follow Gordon's take at runesoup.com, and people can follow Chris's take at secretsun.blogspot.com. I appreciate you both, and all the stuff we talked about today, I think people will as well. Couldn't do it without you. Keep doing what you do, and take care out there.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Greg. Always a pleasure.
Well, feed me Seymour. Big show today. The biggest of shows. Of course, I don't have to tell you that. But this was also just very cathartic for me to hear how both Chris and Gordon are looking at this thing. It's difficult to parse. There are various layers and players and motivations. Never let a good crisis go to waste is definitely in play here. So all the cockroaches with a playbook do seem to be scrambling to gain some ground against us. Corporations who can take a bigger chunk out of the middle class, Wall Street parasites, digital tech companies that want to use this as Exhibit A as to why they should be a bigger part of our lives, and we're safer just speaking to each other through their platforms. Political think tanks seizing the opportunity. Who knows who was in it from the beginning and who just jumped in opportunistically. But when you hear about Bill Gates maneuvering around and Jeff Bezos selling off a lot of stock and groups of senators, probably more than we've even heard about, using their privileged insights from the CDC to sell off their stocks a few weeks before the crash they knew was coming, you add it all up and definitely something stinks there. But I do start to think that the questions of who caused this, where it originated, is the virus real or not, who's holding the reins here, these are all interesting questions. But my read on the people right now is that they'd much rather just know how they should expect this to affect them. It's too invasive. It's already affecting us. And this ain't no alien moon bases show here, you know? And biological false flag, I think, might be a good term for this. And when 9/11 happened, it seemed so epic and new. But then I learned about the history of false flags and realized it's not a new strategy, just a new way of doing it. And I feel the same way here, that when you watch these presentations that go over polio and the use of DDT chemical pesticides, and then you hop over to the Spanish flu and the widespread use of the first round of aspirin, and then you look at HIV/AIDS, and you look at SARS, and you start to see a lot of nastiness going on in the chaos of those times, of these so-called pandemics, and it's typically a culling and an attack on the poor. So I'm very hesitant to go full-on viruses don't cause disease and pandemics don't happen, because I think that's a position that just turns a lot of people off. It's way too deep, and it probably maybe even goes too far. It just could be a dangerous thing to say if you aren't really fucking sure, and how could I be? But if we just drill down on this one particular coronavirus situation, then I think we can make a good case that this testing is flawed, the treatments are harsh and life-threatening to certain people, and the economic effects of the overall protocol are affecting a lot more people. And it's, of course, less hands-on, but I don't think the term culling of the poor and old is too drastic a term to at least be thinking about as we see what rolls out. Also, China knocking down the market, just like they swept up and shipped off the wreckage of 9/11, another little parallel to that. But this was one episode we just threw together real quick, and we bypassed my typical editing process, but I still think it's very listenable. We're all professionals by now. I'm sure we could have improved it slightly, but this isn't the kind of show that you want to wait 5 more days for. And it's just such a special assembling of the crew. I also considered dropping it out for everyone, but I literally just did that yesterday with David Crow. I've been working like mad, and I set this system up for support, yes, so I could get out of my job at GameStop, and thank God, because they're doing some pretty nefarious stuff right now in the wake of this crisis, acting like slave drivers and telling their employees who make minimum wage if they want Purell, it's best to just bring it from home. But I built this, and now I actually have obligations to those people to provide them the content that they pay for. So I'm going to honor that. Both Chris and Gordon also have premium support platforms too, so they can both use the second hour in that way as well. Gordon's been doing that for RuneSoup members for quite some time, and now that I think about it, if this situation does tend to go on, and Gordon wanted to do an ongoing series of semi-regular updates for those members, and we wanted to call it the Bubble Boys, I wouldn't hate it. In fact, I did just see that he is taking a page out of Joseph Farrell's book that I think is excellent and opening up a section of his premium content to be a sort of Corona Chaos newsroom so that he can spin this off into its own thing and keep it coming in a more private way, because I don't think you can keep having these conversations on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. It's kind of like there are a lot of things you can't say on network TV. Then move to cable and there's fewer things you can't say, and then go full on, hey, I paid for this HBO or Sirius XM, and then you can do whatever you want. I think we should keep that in mind when it comes to trying to keep this ship going. Tone down some of the public talk, but when we shut the blinds and lock the doors inside of the Plus Club, we can't get fucked with. And I'm just spitballing here, but clearly I was having these thoughts just yesterday when I wrapped up the David Crow episode. I don't know about building out a part of the website, but our Plus member forum is grossly underused. I am going to make a Corona Chaos thread, and we can help keep each other stay informed. And just like Chris and Gordon, if we have some disagreements on how to interpret all this and what the real storyline is, let's talk about it. We're all on the same side, we're inner circle, so be respectful. But let's let our ideas stand up to scrutiny, like college was supposed to be about back in the day. So that's what I think we're going to do for now. We're going to utilize the forum a bit more, and we can share news and articles without the risk of a real deplatforming. I'm going to be good on Twitter. I'm going to treat social media more like network TV censorship standards. It doesn't change the podcast itself. It's just changing all that other shit. Also, I gotta say this, and it was actually one of my favorite parts of this show, and it was only in the second hour, but I got worked up and started talking about the shaming that I'm seeing of people who are outside, or stories of people calling the cops because they see a bar that's still serving, or the countless comments I've gotten about why did you have a friend in the room with your joint session, and why were you sharing joints? Enough of that. But I made the point that tens of thousands of people are listening right now. What advice do we have for them when it comes to combating that sort of behavior? Because it is a dangerous slide. It gets very Orwellian. And of course, there are actually tens of thousands of free listeners, but definitely not plus people. I mean, could you imagine if I had 10,000, let alone tens of thousands of plus members? We'd have been doing some pretty big things. Brooks Agnew would be on that expedition to the inner earth, I can tell you that. We'd have funded some stuff by now for sure. I mentioned on a wrap-up not long ago that while I can't do the money bomb anymore, I would like to get back into that mindset of possibly having an ongoing aspect of those like third world microloans. You know, those websites where it's like, if you could just buy this poor man 5 goats, he can start a business off of that milk and cheese and survive. But he needs $200. You know, that's the level that I'm thinking about, because that's where we are. I mean, we don't even have 5% of the full audience coming over to the plus side, sadly. It's all good. I mean, we get by. This is not a pity party for me at all. I'm just saying, number one, my timing was bad when I brought up that tens of thousands of people are listening in the wrong part of the show. But number two, and much more importantly, I just wanted to talk to you about those things now because they were in the second hour. And now that we're in the wrap up, and it literally is anyone who listens to THC, our full audience, and of course, the ones who stick around to the end, it's important to remember that we aren't small in numbers. And even though we are regulated to our homes, we aren't alone. Yes, I'm the conduit, and you guys don't have a lot of direct coordination yourselves, but I'm talking to enough people right now to fill Madison Square Garden 3 times over. And besides giving myself a mild heart attack and anxiety-inducing stage fright in the comfort of my own home, we do have agents everywhere, so to speak. And we can have an effect on how effective the psychological operation and the socioeconomic operation is to a degree. So the idea of shaming people who are outside, of ratting each other out in this gross way, calling the police because a bar is still serving, as Gordon said, you don't know if that guy is just trying to sell enough beer to buy treatment for his sick mother. So I do think we should help tone down the judgment without being confrontational or aggressive, more flies with honey and all that. But we should not stand idly by and let everything amplify like that. Even if you share Chris's opinion that this is a bioweapon and you can get sick, it's still easy to see that the virus isn't going to affect everyone, and it's not going to be inside every public business that's closed right now. Yet the economic impact will affect everyone, and some of these closed businesses might not come back. In the Plus show, when we were having this conversation, Gordon also said, start with kindness. And if we see this sort of shaming, we should say, look, you just don't know about that person's mental health, what their needs are. Maybe they need this. So ease up. And also, both of them were pretty much in agreement when we said, this is what we're for. And I agree. We built these communities over time, and it might just be fun stuff to listen to on your way to work, when work was the thing back in the old world. But it is not a time to sit idly by, or for saying I told you so, just because we did sound the alarm bell on the technocratic totalitarian tiptoe, and have been for a long time. As Jordan Peterson would say, be the reliable person at a funeral. Funeral, so to speak, of course. I don't know. It's all just my word vomit stemming from wanting to know what we can do, how this show could be helpful, how we could subtly seed a tone that will help our situation not throw fuel on the fire. As both Gordon and Chris talked about, we have astrological markers and predictive models that both say this time period is likely a blip on the radar compared to next year. As Chris said, this might have been more of a drill. And like Gordon wrote in Chaos Protocols, I think, he definitely said it on THC at least a year ago, but permaculture is fun and necessary. Don't you want to learn these things when it's still just a hobby and not when everything is in the red? Of course, panicking never got anyone anywhere, but having conversations about preparedness can be useful. I'm just trying to stay positive and not end with that particular comment. So in the Plus Show, we did discuss things like Event 201 and pandemic drill running, the potential of an incoming asteroid, that story's out there, Chris's shamanic illness, getting in touch with the spirits, what policies we might expect to see in the aftermath here, what Chris is seeing on the synchro-mystic side, definitely good stuff, and of course, what conversation is ever complete without a little Nick Cage. So let me just stop talking and back away from my computer. It has been a pretty rapid fire 4 days, but I do care a lot about what's happening. And I know people do look to us for ideas and answers. And I wanted to do my best to make you feel like you have invested your time wisely. So just doing what a humble stoner college dropout can do here. But thanks for listening, and do take care of you and yours. Big thanks to Chris and Gordon, two of the great loves of my life, and I'll see you later. Your move assistants and agents of Mr. Global's technocratic takeover, your fucking move.
This is important, hear what I said. I'm trying to tell you, it's not paranoia, not in my head. It's just the hard truth. Knocked on your door while I still can to ask you a question, 'cause I know your head is still in the sand. Don't be sheep to your slaughter for the rest of your life. Oppressed, but you're getting woke. You say you don't want to be stressed until the day you die. Tough luck, my friend. Did you get the memo? Can't you see that we're so screwed? Don't you know we're our kung food? Can't you just admit we're screwed? I'm gonna tell you this anyway. It's a scary dark world, scarier every day. Scary dark world, no matter what you say. Scary dark world, don't think we'll be okay. Can't you see that we're so screwed? You sit and wish, but we don't have a choice. It seems we're stuck here, but you can find gnosis, drown out the noise. Now use that altar and up your magic game and listen to THC. You know you go with the entities. If you ever see the UFO, don't be sheep to your slaughter for the rest of your life. Oppressed, but you're getting woke. You say you don't want to be stressed until the day you die. Tough luck, my friend. Did you get the memo? Can't you say that we're so screwed? Don't you know we're our kung food? Can't you just admit we're screwed? I'm gonna tell you this anyway. It's a scary dark world, scarier every day. Scary dark world, no matter what you say. Scary dark world, don't think we'll be okay. Can't you see that we're so screwed? live your life. Oh, pressed, but you're getting woke. You say you don't want to be stressed until the day you die. Tough luck, my friend. Did you get the memo? Can't you say that we're